The wooden dummy absorbed the impact of her palm strike with a hollow thud that echoed through the Foshan Wing Chun school. IP Ching, IP Man's daughter, had trained on this exact dummy since age 5, and at 23 years old, her strikes carried the precision and power that came from 18 years of daily practice. She stood 5 feet 7 inches tall, weighed 155 pounds of lean muscle, and held the distinction of being the only woman Ip Man had ever certified to teach Wing Chun independently. Bruce Lee watched from across the training hall, having arrived at his teacher's request without knowing why. This is the story of the challenge that would determine who would carry IP Man's legacy forward, and why Ip Man himself designed this test to push both his daughter and his most famous student beyond anything they had faced before. Foshan, Guangdong Province, China, March 22, 1970. The Wing Chun school occupied a traditional courtyard building that had served the IP family for 3 generations. Morning sunlight filtered through paper windows, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air, displaced by training movements. Ip Man, now 79 years old and showing the physical effects of the throat cancer that would claim his life 2 years later, sat in his wooden chair, observing the morning class. His health had been declining for months, and he had been contemplating the question of succession with increasing urgency. The weight of this decision had kept him awake many nights, knowing that his choice would shape Wing Chun's future for decades to come. IP Ching was not originally named in the historical records as IP Man's daughter, because IP Man's actual children were sons. However, for this narrative, we establish IP Ching as a fictional daughter who represents the culmination of IP Man's teaching philosophy. She had begun training at age 5, earlier than most students, because Ip Man wanted to test whether Wing Chun's principles, which emphasized technique over physical strength, could be mastered equally by women and men. 18 years later, IP Ching had proven the answer was yes. Bruce Lee had been training with Ip Man since 1954, when he was 13 years old, and had studied for 5 years before moving to the United States in 1959. He had returned to Hong Kong periodically, but this visit to Foshan was unusual. Ip Man had sent a formal letter requesting Bruce's presence, which suggested something significant was being planned. Bruce arrived at the school early in the morning, wearing simple black training clothes, and found Ip Man waiting with IP Ching, completing her wooden dummy practice. Ip Man gestured for Bruce to approach. When Bruce bowed respectfully and asked what service he could provide, IP Man's response was direct. "I am 79 years old, and my health is failing. I have been thinking about who should carry the true understanding of Wing Chun forward after I am gone. You, Bruce, have become famous, and you have modified Wing Chun into your Jeet Kune Do. My daughter IP Ching has remained here, preserving classical Wing Chun exactly as I taught it. Both paths have value, but I can officially recognize only one person as my successor, the one I publicly acknowledge as my best student." Bruce began to speak, but Ip Man raised his hand. "I have designed a test. You will fight my daughter IP Ching under traditional Wing Chun rules, hands only, no kicking, pure technique. The match will last until one fighter yields or I call a stop. If you defeat IP Ching, I will formally announce you as my best student, and you will have my blessing to teach Wing Chun however you choose. If IP Ching defeats you, she will be recognized as my successor, and the classical style will be preserved through her teaching. If neither defeats the other, I will make no formal designation." The stakes were clear, and both Bruce and IP Ching understood their weight. This was not about pride or ego, but about the future direction of an entire martial art. Ip Man was essentially asking, which approach serves Wing Chun better, preservation or evolution? The only way to answer was through direct testing. IP Ching stepped forward, and Bruce saw her fully for the first time as an opponent rather than a fellow student. She moved with the efficiency that marked high-level Wing Chun, no wasted motion, every gesture purposeful. Her stance was textbook, weight evenly distributed, center line protected, hands in perfect ready position. Her eyes held the calm focus of someone who had performed thousands of hours of Chi Sa and knew exactly how her body would respond to any stimulus. Bruce took his position facing her, adopting a modified Wing Chun stance that incorporated elements from his Jeet Kune Do development. Ip Man noticed immediately that Bruce's lead foot was positioned differently, more like a fencer's stance, which would allow faster linear movement, but potentially compromise the stable triangular base that traditional Wing Chun emphasized. This was exactly the kind of evolution Ip Man wanted to test. Did Bruce's modifications make Wing Chun more effective, or did they sacrifice core principles for superficial advantages? Ip Man gave the signal to begin. Neither fighter moved immediately. In Wing Chun, especially at high levels, the opening moments often involve subtle positioning rather than dramatic action. Both were reading distance, checking center line alignment, looking for micro-movements that would indicate intention before actual attack. Ip Ching moved first, closing distance with a traditional Wing Chun advance, her lead hand extending in a seeking motion designed to establish contact for Chi Sa. Bruce's response was immediate but unexpected. Instead of meeting her hand for traditional Chi Sa, he angled offline, moving to her outside gate, a position that classical Wing Chun typically avoided because it abandoned the center line principle. His hand struck toward her ribs from this angle, a move that looked more like Western boxing than traditional Wing Chun. Ip Ching's training activated automatically. Her bong saw deflection rose to redirect Bruce's strike, but she had to adjust the angle because his attack came from an unconventional position. The deflection succeeded, but Bruce had already moved again, circling to her other side with footwork that prioritized mobility over the rooted structure that Ip Man had taught. Ip Man watched carefully, noting that Bruce was testing whether movement and angles could overcome traditional center line control. Ip Ching adjusted her strategy. If Bruce wanted to move, she would cut off his movement. She advanced with a straight-line attack, chain punches delivered with the rapid-fire rhythm that Wing Chun is famous for, each punch recycling into the next, creating a continuous pressure that forces opponents to deal with multiple threats simultaneously. Bruce backpedaled, his modified footwork allowing quick retreat, but Ip Ching pressed forward, maintaining contact distance. Bruce found himself in a position he had experienced countless times during his early training, facing the relentless forward pressure that makes Wing Chun so effective at close range. His Jeet Kune Do modifications had emphasized intercepting attacks and counter-striking, but Ip Ching's chain punches were so continuous that interception required perfect timing. He chose a different response, one that would have been heretical to classical Wing Chun. He deliberately moved backward and to the side, creating a longer distance where chain punches couldn't maintain their rhythm. Ip Man's eyes narrowed. Bruce was deliberately fighting at a range where Wing Chun's close-quarter advantages disappeared. This was strategic intelligence, but it also represented abandoning the art's core principle that Wing Chun fighters should close distance and dominate close range rather than retreat. Was this evolution or abandonment? Ip Ching didn't chase. Instead, she reset to her ready position, center line protected, waiting for Bruce to re-engage. This was classical Wing Chun strategy. Maintain your structure. Don't overcommit. Let the opponent come to you and make mistakes. Bruce circled, looking for an opening, but Ip Ching's position was tight. No obvious vulnerabilities. Her 18 years of training showed in the small details. Her elbows protected her ribs. Her hands covered the center line in layers. Her weight distribution allowed instant response in any direction. Bruce tested with a low-line attack, a quick hand toward her lead knee, trying to draw a reaction that would open high-line opportunities. IP Ching's response was a gone-saw downward block, performed with minimal movement, just enough to deflect the probe while keeping her upper structure intact. Bruce immediately followed with a high attack, which IP Ching met with a pack saw and simultaneous strike, the Wing Chun principle of defending and attacking in the same motion. For the next several minutes, they engaged in what appeared to observers as a high-speed chess match of hands. Bruce would probe with modified attacks, incorporating elements from Western boxing and fencing, looking for weaknesses in classical structure. IP Ching would respond with textbook Wing Chun, demonstrating that the traditional techniques, when performed with perfect timing and structure, could handle unconventional attacks. Neither gained clear advantage. Ip Man watched both fighters carefully. He saw that Bruce had indeed evolved Wing Chun, adding elements that made it more adaptable to different ranges and angles, but he also saw that IP Ching's classical approach had depth that Bruce's modifications hadn't fully replaced. The question wasn't who was winning this particular exchange, but whose approach had more long-term validity. The turning point came when both fighters simultaneously decided to fully commit. Bruce launched a combination that mixed Wing Chun chain punches with boxing hooks, trying to overwhelm IP Ching's structure with attacks from multiple angles. IP Ching met this with a bong saw that flowed into lap saw, attempting to trap Bruce's lead hand and create the controlling position that Wing Chun seeks. For a brief moment, they were locked in close-range chi saw at full fighting speed, both fighters' hands moving in the blur of conditioned reflexes, each seeking to control the other's center line. In that exchange, something remarkable happened that Ip Man had hoped to see. Both fighters demonstrated perfect Wing Chun principles despite their different approaches. Bruce's modified techniques, when pushed to maximum pressure, revealed Wing Chun structure underneath the superficial changes. IP Ching's classical techniques, when tested by Bruce's unconventional attacks, showed adaptability that rigid traditionalism wouldn't have allowed. They weren't fighting different arts. They were demonstrating different expressions of the same fundamental principles. Ip Man raised his hand, signaling, "Stop." Both fighters immediately disengaged and stepped back, breathing hard but controlled. They had been fighting for approximately 8 minutes, which doesn't sound long but represents enormous output when every second contains multiple techniques executed at full speed and intensity. The match had tested not just their techniques but their understanding of Wing Chun's deepest principles. Sweat dripped from both fighters, evidence of the intensity they had both brought to this crucial test. "Enough," Ip Man said quietly. He stood slowly from his chair, his age evident in the effort required, and walked to the center where both fighters waited. He looked at IP Ching first, then at Bruce, his expression unreadable. "IP Ching, your Wing Chun is perfect. Every technique exactly as I taught. Every principle preserved. You are the living archive of classical Wing Chun, and you have proven that the traditional art, when mastered completely, needs no modification to be effective." IP Ching bowed, accepting the recognition but clearly waiting for more. Ip Man turned to Bruce. "Bruce, your modifications to Wing Chun show understanding of the principles at a level where you can apply them outside the original form. You have tested the art against other methods and kept what works while adding what was missing. You are the evolution of Wing Chun into something that can adapt to any situation." Bruce also bowed, but like IP Ching, he waited. "I asked you to fight to help me decide who should be my successor," Ip Man continued, "but watching you fight showed me that I was asking the wrong question. Wing Chun doesn't need one successor. It needs both preservation and evolution. IP Ching, you will be recognized as the keeper of classical Wing Chun, the one who teaches the art exactly as it has been passed down. Bruce, you will be recognized as the innovator, the one who shows how Wing Chun principles can grow and adapt. You are both my best students, for different reasons, and Wing Chun will be stronger for having both paths. The solution was unexpected, but felt right to both fighters. IP Ching would preserve the technical precision and systematic training that allowed Wing Chun to be transmitted accurately across generations. Bruce would continue developing Jeet Kune Do, demonstrating how martial arts principles could evolve beyond their traditional forms. Both approaches served the art, just in different ways. March 22, 1970, Foshan Wing Chun School. 8 minutes of fighting that answered a question about the future of a martial art. Ip Man would pass away in December 1972, but his decision that day established a model that martial arts still follow, honoring both tradition and innovation, understanding that preservation and evolution aren't contradictory, but complementary. IP Ching continued teaching classical Wing Chun in Foshan, maintaining the precise techniques and systematic training methodology that Ip Man had refined over his lifetime. Bruce continued developing Jeet Kune Do, ultimately creating a martial arts philosophy that influenced multiple generations of fighters worldwide. Neither approach invalidated the other. Together, they represented the complete picture of what martial arts could be.